Hello and welcome to my bookbinding tutorial with me, Giles Whitehead. And this is the book we're going to be making today. I have been interested in books and bookbinding ever since I did a bookbinding project at art college over 30 years ago. And I've enjoyed making books ever since then. Ever since I've been to art college, I've drawn in sketchbooks, and when I'm working on a collection of work, I will put together a small reproduction sketchbook. So that's what you can see here. Now, when I start making a sketchbook, a very important thing is the grain of the paper. Now, this is one thing that you will subconsciously notice when you handle a book. Some books feel really nice and smooth to turn, whereas others feel like you're flicking through a stack of cardboard because it doesn't turn and bend nicely. Now, this is because of the grain of the paper. Now, when you hold a sheet or a stack of paper in your hands, you will notice that it will bend more easily in one direction than the other. Now, what you need to do when you make your sketchbook is to make sure that you are going with the grain and not going against the grain. So if you go against the grain, your book will not turn nicely. It won't feel nice in your hands. Now, we're going to make a fairly thin sketchbook here. Now, you can make a thicker one, but what you have to do is to sew sections of folded paper together to make a thicker sketchbook, which is easy to do. But today we're just going to use one section of paper. So what I'm doing here is making holes along the crease. I'm putting in 3 holes because it's just a small book. I'm not putting the holes too near the edge because we'll be trimming the book off afterwards to get a nice clean edge. So I'm using a bradawl here because you don't want to stab yourself with a needle trying to force it through a load of layers of paper. And then I've got a needle and a strong thread. What I'm basically doing is sewing a figure of 8 to hold those pages in place nice and tightly. And I've doubled up the thread for extra strength because you don't want your thread snapping and your pages falling out afterwards. So there we go, tie a nice knot. Make sure it's not loose because you don't want your pages wobbling around in your book. That would be quite annoying. So then what we do is we use end papers. Again, feel for the grain of the paper. And make sure your fold is going with the grain and not against the grain. I'm just tearing it at this point because, as I said, all the edges are going to get trimmed off so you get a nice neat edge. So I'm using a bit of scrap paper, so it's a good idea to have a lot of scrap paper which you can use if you get glue on things. And what I'm doing is I'm just masking off an area so I get a nice clean line of glue for my end paper to glue onto my inner pages. So I'm using PVA glue here. And then what I'm doing is gluing that on to my inner pages there. And then do the exact same thing on the other side. So again, mask off it so you get a nice neat line of glue. And then glue it neatly onto the edge. Then for extra strength I'm using a bit of cloth. You're best using something natural like cotton because it generally sticks better. So get a nice amount of glue along the spine and the edge, and then carefully wrap your piece of cloth around will give your book some extra strength. Make sure all that cloth is glued down nice and neatly. And it doesn't matter about the edges because they will get trimmed off. Now this part, make sure you're careful and you trim off the edges. Don't try and trim the entire book off in one go, or your fingers. Just nice, soft, drawing the blade across and very neatly trimming the edge of your book. Try and make it as straight as you can. So I'm not pressing hard, I'm just drawing the blade across. And if you were making a thicker sketchbook, you could do this in the exact same way, and you could cut a really, a huge thickness of pages just by gradually drawing the blade across. But make sure you've got a nice sharp blade so it gets a nice clean edge. So there we go. That is your inner section of your book completed. Now what you need is some thicker board. I'm just drawing around the edge of my book to get the right size for my outer cover. And then again, cutting the boards of my book. Again, not trying to do it in one go, just gradually cutting through the thickness of that board. So then what I'm doing is just cutting the spine. I'm making the spine the same thickness as the inner pages of my book. So now I'm taking some of that same cloth and again using the PVA glue down the edges, along the spine. Then placing my piece of cloth down, you could obviously use whatever colour you wanted, leaving a few millimetres to allow the book to be able to open and close. Sometimes what you can also do to make a really nice neat edge, you can carefully chamfer the edge off with a knife, a nice angle on the edge of your book. But for time's sake, my book has got very square edges. Then I'm using some brown paper to finish off the cover neatly. Glue up to the edge. Change your scrap paper frequently so you don't get glue all over your book. Then carefully place on the outer edge of my book cover. Smooth it down neatly. Turn it over. Trim the edges. And I don't cut right up to the corners because you'll see why. You see me just pinching that part in there at the edge there so you don't get a piece of grey cardboard sticking out the edge of your book covers. So you get a nice neat corner. And then do the same on the other side. So pinch the corner in there and finish off your cover. So then the last part is to glue your inner pages in to your book cover. What I'm doing there is just putting a piece of scrap paper between the end papers so that I don't get glue all over my inner pages and stick them together. You don't want your book to be stuck together, so that's the purpose of just placing that extra bit of paper in there. Try to avoid getting glue on the inner pages, like I've just got a bit on there, but never mind. So you just got to position it so the pivot of the end papers and your cover are matched up. So this one takes a bit of practice. But the good thing about the PVA is if you put it on quite thickly, there is some room for adjustment because it will take a little while to dry. There we go. So just make sure it opens and closes, and the end papers don't buckle up. So if you sort of close it, push it together, Then open it up again. You can see it's buckled a little bit there, so just push it down again. Make sure it goes nice and flat. And there is your hardback sketchbook. Now what I would do, just at the end, to make sure your book, because it's obviously full of glue and there's quite a lot of moisture in there, is if you put some other paper between the end papers again, and then you put something heavy on it, you can leave it to dry, and any moisture from that glue will go into your extra paper and knot your pages and buckle them up. And there you are, one finished sketchbook. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and if you'd like to see any of my other art videos, please subscribe.